welcome to the NegotiateHer podcast. I'm Gitanjali and Apa, a seasoned negotiator and a management consultant with over 25 years of experience.
And I'm Apa Gupta, a new manager and a negotiation newbie. Together, we're here to explore the intergenerational perspectives on women and people of color in negotiation, bridging our 20-year age gap.
In each episode, we aim to inspire women and people of color to reclaim power, offering practical tips and sharing personal stories so that we can set an example for future generations. Negotiation is the process of reaching an agreement. It's about finding common ground and creating a space to navigate towards solutions.
Today, we're going to unpack some key negotiation concepts that will help you become a more confident and effective negotiator. The concepts are BATNA, reservation point, and ZOPA. So, why did we choose these three things specifically, Gitanjali?
We spent a lot of time actually talking about the very many concepts that are tied with negotiation. We know that a ton of research that has been done on this topic. And there are two researchers that I want to bring up. They're negotiation researchers, so they have researched specifically negotiations. We're not talking about communication, we're not talking about leadership. They're really looking at negotiations. And that's Roger Fisher and William Ury. They are of the Harvard Program on Negotiations. You may have heard this very often. It's called PON, which I find very funny that it's called PON. But anyway, the Harvard Program on Negotiations, and they pioneered these concepts. The reason that we should cover these concepts is if you understand these concepts intellectually, then you understand the detail behind it, and that gives you additional ways to think about negotiation. My experience has been, and especially personal experience as well as professional experience, when people are new to this strategic conversation, arriving at an agreement, they do it instinctively and they do it with gut feel. But there is science. So if you know the science, why would you not apply the science? It gives you a nuanced way of looking at negotiation. The other reason for specifically picking these three is these are some of the smartest people on the planet where it comes to negotiations. They literally are getting a salary to figure out what makes negotiations work and not work. So if we can just borrow from them, take the theory that they have also seen in practice and apply it to your own circumstances, understanding that everybody's circumstances are unique, every situation is different. But if you can take something that has been heavily funded, heavily researched, and there is outcomes that you can rely on, why wouldn't you? So that's the reason for picking the three biggest, most important ones to get us started.
I think you touched on the point a little bit of why it's important to understand the theory, even though it might feel academic, because it makes you think critically about your situation and it pushes you to analyze situations in a greater detail, thinking of both the, let's say, dollar part of negotiation, but also a little bit of the softer parts of negotiation and really think about them critically.
Many of us have the opportunity to do soft skill training. And I dislike that term, soft skills and hard skills. And there's a wonderful article actually written about where the origin of the word soft and the origin of the word hard and the origin of calling them male and calling them female. The reason that I'm bringing this up is that from a negotiations perspective, to look at this is more around the social skills, because it's about understanding the dynamics at play. And knowing that actually gives us a broader perspective. And you then can take those strategies that you've learned from other people, which we're going to give you in this episode, that you can apply to your own work. Because what works for you, Apa, we clearly know sometimes works for me, but sometimes it doesn't work for me. But if I have that tool set, if I have access to being aware that there are these tools available to me, then I can develop my own negotiation approach, which I have over the years, right? So I have a very fine-tuned way of handling negotiations, whether they are at work, meaning on a contract, or if they're people on my team, which is not contractual, but it's human dynamics. Or maybe they're even just simple things like, hey, I don't want to go eat Asian again. Can we please go eat Italian? Right? All of it. But I actually have an approach to it because I've studied it and I've applied it and I've fine-tuned it. And I'm hoping that this episode is going to give us just the foundation of these three concepts and the ability as we go forward in future episodes to practice these concepts.
To me, everything starts with something foundational, and that's the mindset. There's a negotiation researcher that we've spoken about quite a lot. We listen to her podcast as well, Angela Duckworth, who's the author of the book Grit and the podcast host of No Stupid Questions. Please go listen to that. It's amazing. Yes. And also co-hosted by Mike Mohan. And they talk about two contrasting mindsets in one of their episodes, which is the choice mindset and the constraint mindset. The choice mindset is all about believing that you have options. You see challenges as opportunities for growth, and you're open to exploring new possibilities. The constrained mindset, on the other hand, gives you exactly the opposite. It makes you feel stuck because you're constantly thinking about what is holding you back, what constraints do you have, and you believe that there's only one way out, and you're quick to give up. So I've identified that when you approach a problem with a choice mindset, it actually opens up the possibilities of things that you can do. Whereas when you think about it in a constrained mindset, when you go into a negotiation with what is things that are going to hold me back or what is limiting, even if you have your own limiting beliefs, it actually reduces your choice set and it kind of puts you in a corner. Both of us studied negotiation. I did a course with Cornell, and you did a course, I think, with Harvard, if I'm not wrong.
Yes. Yeah, Harvard Online.
Yeah, look at us. We're both Ivy Leaguers at negotiation. And I still struggle because there's theory and then there's practice. But the three terms that we will be introducing today were introduced in both our courses. You'd start with BATNA. So could you give us a quick introduction to this, please?
BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Now, as I'd mentioned earlier, these are these two negotiations researchers, Roger Fisher, William Ury. They have the Harvard program on negotiations. They pioneered the concept of BATNA. Now, the first time that I heard this in my negotiations class, it was called Negotiations Mastery, I was like, that's a bunch of theory. I don't know about this. Best alternatives to a negotiated agreement. It all sounds too technical in a way. I'd also heard of this term in previous negotiations trainings that I had in the Big Four that I used to belong to, and then in a tech firm that I used to work for before that. And then I started thinking about BATNA quite differently. I said, let's eliminate from my own brain, just to help me comprehend it, the academic side of it, and let me break it down to what are my options. So for me, BATNA equals to generate options. That's how I think of BATNA. So the concept of BATNA, maybe let me give you an example. I had introduced this to you earlier, and you know this, Apa, that I spent about a year contemplating what did I want to do with my career. And I came up with options. Now, those options were my BATNA for a negotiation with my country managing partner who runs the part of the business that I was in. So let me tell you some of my options. And then that is BATNA. So I want you to think of the word BATNA as options. So option number one, I thought, one, I can just quietly quit. Nobody needs to know that I don't want to do this work anymore, that I have this bubbling of wanting to do something else. But the money is really great. I love the work. My ego is satisfied. So I can just quietly quit, but stay. That's option one. I came up with option 2. I can quietly quit, but plot an escape, which is use the time to find other work or other things that I want to do. Very valid option as well. Third one, very melodramatic, but I had to put it on the table, was I will walk in there and talk about my passion and I will quit immediately because I should be a person of consequence. Very valid, but that's just not who I am. But I had to put it down to be able to laugh at it and say, yeah, that's not who you are, right? But I had to put it down. So that was another option. And then the calming process of writing it down, seeing it on paper, chewing on it for a few weeks, few months, I came up with another BATNA, which is the BATNA that I went in to have further discussions on. And that BATNA was based on a few fundamental long-term aspects. So one, as a partner in a big four, honestly, I didn't want to get sued. So anything that I do, I didn't want to end up getting sued by the firm. So let's be straightforward. One of my criteria was choose the option that doesn't get you sued. Great, check. Easy to do, actually. Not so difficult if you're being ethical and you're doing fine. You're really okay. Next thing, I also knew that I didn't want to burn bridges in terms of these long-term friendships that I have. So doing something melodramatic was not an option for me at all. I wanted to preserve these friendships that I've had over the years. And then from a client side, I actually value those relationships. I want to be a person of integrity with my clients. I plan to have them as friends or as future colleagues to be in my ecosystem for the next decade of my life. So I wanted to preserve those client relationships and wrapping that up in a very pleasant, amicable. But why do I say pleasant and amicable? Really, because I like to think of myself as pleasant and amicable. So I wanted to be in sync with who I believe I am. So mitigate my risks, be honest and true to myself, be relaxed about it, and come up with an option together with the country managing partner that preserves these long-term relationships. That is the BATNA. So that's options.
Wow. That makes me feel very, very small about what I did instead.
No.
So I have another example where I didn't really allow myself the space for alternatives. I was in a work situation where I felt that it was toxic and I was not able to be who I really am, express what I wanted to without the fear of retaliation or the fear of being made to feel that I'm not good enough and that I was not really needed. So, because of that, I came to a point where I realized that there was no other agreement to be made. There were some alternatives which were presented to me. However, because I didn't trust in the person, the other party, came to the realization that there was no agreement to be made. Whether this was true, I'm not sure. However, it was coming from a place of deep emotion. And this is something which I've realized. I'm not sure, and maybe it's a question to you, Gitanjali, whether emotion plays a role in negotiation.
Yes, 100%. We are rational creatures, we are emotional creatures. There is a space for emotion, but I think you just need to plan for it. You To me, heat of the moment is not emotion, that's passion and it's misplaced. So there
Mhm.
is a place to address how you feel, whether you're angry, you're sad, you're ambitious, you're hopeful, place for all of that. And there is a place for anger as well. And there's a place for it in the negotiation, there's a place for it in the conversation. But there's no place for it if you don't have it under control. And there's no place for it if you don't know how to manage it and use it to serve you. So 100% you should feel these things, but being calm and collected during a negotiation allows you to know that you have a backup plan. Maybe that's another term for BATNA. BATNA is a backup plan. So you know that you have a backup plan. It's very human to have these emotions, but to be a good negotiator, you have to find the home for those emotions and then use sadness, tears, anger in the conversation to serve you and not to hinder you.
Yeah, thinking back to it now, there were two alternatives that I had planned for myself. So one, that I was going to leave. So I was going to quietly quit, as you put it. But then I realized that that was probably not the best option, given that I'm in a country where my skill set is very niche for the market. And it's not that easy for me to find another job which would fulfill the criteria that I had set for myself, that would fulfill my intellectual drive. On the other hand, my family is here. So previously, whereas it was an option for me to pack my bags and move to another country, that is no longer an option, given that I do have a child. But what I did realize is that quitting was probably not my BATNA. My BATNA was finding another place for myself in that organization so that I'm able to explore what that company had to offer. Because the company is amazing, they have amazing benefits, amazing growth opportunities for you, but maybe I had just managed to get myself in a situation where I wasn't being able to explore that. And that's what I realized. What I did not allow myself was any more exploration of what that person could offer me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether that was true or not, whether that was a good option, I'm not sure, but I did know that there were some things, and I think that's a nice bridge to reservation price as well.
Okay, give me a second. You know what is on my calendar for right now? Give Zuki a shower. He stinks. So Zuki shower can wait. All right, there. I have deleted it from my calendar. Let's continue. All right. So you stopped at you introduced reservation point. Reservation point. Again, academically, I struggled with this term. I didn't quite get it because it felt too much like car salesman. I want to buy a car for 33,000, or it also felt too numerical for me.
Mm-hmm.
For the sake of our episode and for the sake of our conversation, and in my brain, just like the way I call BATNA options and backup plan, the way that I look at reservation point is what's my least acceptable point? Where is that line where after this I'm going to walk away? So maybe it's a walk away point. It's a bottom line. When people talk about that's my bottom line, what do I mean? The other word that I've heard very much actually when I used to be on dating apps was what are your non-negotiables? So
Mm-hmm.
I think of this as what's least acceptable? What's kind of my non-negotiable? What's my bottom line? I find these terms much easier to digest versus reservation point. So what is it actually? It's those factors, those things, those criteria that you absolutely will not compromise on. And maybe it's not will not, you cannot compromise. So for example, Apa, in what you were saying, you have to live where you live. You have a son, you have a family. That is, you can't say, I will not compromise, but you cannot. So it's a matter of circumstance. It's a matter of what it is, but it's again good to know that you can't. And on the flip side, you and I both have lived lives where we could get up and move and leave and go restart somewhere and evolve and pivot and do all of those things. So just knowing that, whether it's a negotiable or not, is a good thing. Also, what is your least acceptable outcome? This doesn't mean that you're dissatisfied. It means like, if this happens, it's fine. I'm all right with it. It can also be if you don't meet this point, you walk away. Because walking away would be better than actually accepting what the person has to offer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's again thinking of alternative. It's like the breaking point of this negotiation. And so if we are negotiating something, it would be better for me to up and say, hey, Apa, thank you so much. That was so nice of you to have this discussion with me, but that doesn't really work for me. So it's better to not accept and walk away. That's how I think of reservation point. Now, it's important, crucial, because it stops you from making impulsive decisions.
Absolutely.
And we were talking about emotion. This is the part about learning these skills, these terms, documenting them for yourself, unpacking, or not even unpacking, revealing them to yourself is important because it stops impulsiveness. And impulsiveness is really dangerous in a negotiation. It either means you're going to leave something on the table, it means you probably will get the lesser deal, it could probably also mean that you ruin a relationship, because if you're in this for the longer time, it's important for you to not be impulsive about it. It goes hand in hand with power. So if you can manage your impulse, then you're giving yourself power. You're setting boundaries. You're maintaining control. Now, the trick is, how do you find these non-negotiables? Which ones are important? And
when I'm thinking about the situation, I mean, while you were speaking, that's the only thing I could think about, because a lot of things that you've said do apply to me in the way that the work that was being done was very much something that I loved doing. And for me to walk away from that, it took a lot, because it's really what the kind of work that my heart loves. I look for it, and I knew that if I changed teams, I would not get that exact work setting. However, for me, my non negotiable here was my mental health and my physical health. There were moments when I was going into a conversation with this person, or even in the presence of this person, where my body would warm up. I would feel like flushing in my cheek, and I would feel physically unsafe. Not because that person was going to hit me or something like that, but just that person's presence and the way that that person would speak. And to me, that was my non negotiable. I couldn't go into work every single day feeling abject dread.
yeah.
And for me, that was my reservation point, which is maybe why it does seem that I made an impulsive decision. However, that point, for me, my mental health and my physical health was so important, especially because I have to be a mother. If it
Mm-hmm.
was just me and I had to deal with myself, it would be different. But I felt that I would come home and I was not mentally there for my child. I was checking out.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was my non negotiable. And it's interesting that we speak through this, because when we do, I also realize sometimes I put a reasoning and words behind some of the decisions that I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm really sorry, actually, that work can be that hard. And on a very simplistic level, I don't think work is meant to be that hard.
So, and I
I think we're meant to all get along, but it's really sad when you feel drained and you're not available for your son. And it's hard. In comparison, now I have a very lame non-negotiable, like nothing emotional at all, but maybe emotional. Let's see. So when I was negotiating my exit, my non-negotiable, or my I can't do without it, let's even call it that, I just can't do without it, was my work permit. So I live and work in this country because I have a work permit, and the work permit is tied to the employer. So if I'm not employed by this company, then I don't have a work permit, which means I can't live and work in this country, which disrupts me, my home, my family, my dog. And it has very existential impact. And for me, that became the only thing that I knew that I was going to negotiate and fight tooth and nail for. Everything else was like icing on the cake. It was candy. And it gave me the power to give it away, because I knew it wasn't that important to me. Because then I could negotiate for the thing that was important to me. And another aspect, when we each sit down and think about our bottom line, there's one for me that is difficult to measure because it's different for everybody. Is this principle of fairness. And I got to thinking that the way that I can arrive at my non negotiables, besides the dollar value or the car that you want, or, this is the number of days of vacation, all of those things that you can quantify, is this feeling of respect and fairness. And what you think is fair may not be what I think is fair. I accept that and I know that. But since this is the process of you as an individual or you as a representative of a company sitting down and writing down fairness, I'm just saying this, you can define it for yourself so that you know what is your line. When you go below that line, it's not acceptable anymore. So it's good to have that awareness. That I like being driven by my personal values when it comes to negotiation. But when it is something professional in terms of a contract and I'm representing my firm, I'm representing my company, I also want to keep in mind what are the priorities of that company. What are the values of that company? What do they and we stand for? So being centered around values and priorities when coming up with your non-negotiables also gives you the courage to stick with it. So you don't come across as flaky. No, fine, you can take it now. Oh, no, now don't take it. So it allows you to actually have far more control and manage that impulsiveness that sometimes creeps in the heat of the moment.
Absolutely. I think this really resonates with how I feel or how I felt. And also now my plan moving forward as well with any of these situations, that I will not let myself get that far.
Yeah. And catching it before it hurts too much and it's too late.
Yeah, I think the main issue with me was also that before we started, we were kind of friends. So it was a huge amount of cognitive dissonance with the work personality versus the friendship personality. And so there was added layers of complexity in that particular situation, which
Mhm.
if it had been somebody else, maybe would have played out completely differently. So I do recognize.
Though, in work circumstances, we are friends with people. So I don't think it complicates it more or less complicates. You and I work together, and I would call us friends at work, and I put that in quotes. You always have relationships at work. Nobody is so far away. It's so far away, then you're not negotiating with that individual. You usually negotiate with the people that have a influence on you, and for that they have to be in your circle, which means they are people that you know. These are people that you've gone to lunch with. These are probably people that you've gone for a walk with their dog. So there is the human side of this. And when that doesn't work, is when you should now begin to rely on these principles of BATNA, of ZOPA, which I will introduce now. But it's because of these human relationships that you should have these extra tools in your toolbox.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
let's do ZOPA.
Let's do that.
Zone of possible agreement. Again, when I heard it on my course, I went, ugh, really? What is ZOPA? Then learning about it with the multiple examples that they give you when there are case studies, I called it the sweet spot because I understand that. Sweet spot for me was like, okay, there's a little Venn diagram. You want something, I want something. We intersect together. That little point of intersection is the sweet spot, and that's ZOPA. That's my oversimplified explanation for it. So it is, again, back to the same Harvard researchers, Roger Fisher, William Ury, same program. They pioneered BATNA, and at the same time, they introduced the concept of ZOPA. And these three, with the reservation price, they kind of go together. Now, what is it? It's the range of outcomes. So think the Venn diagram, lots of outcomes, but where you can find something common where what you have is better than your partner. That's kind of what you're finding a deal that's better than your individual partner. Now, to find that, you have to understand first your own partner. Then you have to play this guessing game of what could be the other person's.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have a sense of where your own bottom line is, then you start exploring what other people's could be. So this requires you to be a little bit of a social scientist. It requires you to put yourself in the shoes of others. It's important to be able to gain the other person's perspective because it's all guessing. There
Yeah.
is no, here's the checklist, here's mine and here's yours. And oh, by the way, ZOPA, you don't actually reveal. You don't say, oh, this is my ZOPA. You don't talk like that, right? This is something that you do. And it shifts all the time. If you get new information, like you get new information that this company is going to be bought by another company. So, hey, you know what? I am a niche skill set. I should ask for more. You didn't have that information when you first talked. Now, a month later, you know that they're going to be acquired. New information. ZOPA should change.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unsaid.
Correct. It is unset. It's fluid. It moves. You have to keep your eye on it. You have to think of this as the ever expanding Venn diagram or contracting Venn diagram too, by the way. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say that the market is really bad. Nobody is hiring. And especially in your industry or your sector, things are bad. Well, you just shrank your Venn diagram. So that's why it isn't permanent. It isn't something that you lock in on. It's something that you create an awareness in yourself. And then you play this guessing game of what the other side, the other party, the other individual, the hiring manager, what theirs is. And then you try and work out that midpoint of where can I get the best deal and they get the best deal. And how does that? It's a little bit of a dance.
Okay. I'm going to try to put this in an example because I did have a bit of a struggle trying to understand how all these terms come together. So I'm going to try to explain it and let me know if I'm correct.
Okay. All right.
So let's take an example of a job offer. I think it's the simplest example to understand these terms. Your BATNA might be current salary that you have at your current job, plus some other factors that are important to you. Like, for example, for me, it was my mental health. The other things were hours of downtime, for example. So, and the company's ZOPA would be then the salary range that they've budgeted for that position. For example, between 50,000 and 65,000 euros. Is that correct? Are we right so far?
Absolutely correct. It's that overlap, right? So you have a salary, let's say it's 55, and the company has a budget of 50 and 65. Well, you found a zone. That's exactly the zone that we're talking about.
Okay, so the
But
zone.
sometimes those don't match.
Say it again.
And if those things don't match, then you don't have a ZOPA. And that's what is really interesting about it, is when those things don't match, then it's not something that you should pursue. It is something that you should walk away from.
Okay, so the ZOPA would be the overlap between what I want. So in this case, the desired salary, if I want 55,000, and the budget. That means if they are willing to pay me 55,000, that is a good deal for me. Anything above that would be even better.
Yes.
Anything below that would be my, so 55 could be my reservation point, or my, the amount that I'm willing to accept, that it's
Yeah.
still a good deal for me.
Yes.
And what about the not? What about some of the other things like the downtime, maybe some benefits that I wanted? Where does
Right.
that?
Okay, so that also very much is part of your ZOPA. So if think of it as trade-offs. So let's say you said 55, but they agree to give you 65. Are you willing to adjust the amount of downtime that you need for that extra 10,000 that they're giving you, right? So you have the option of looking elsewhere or adjusting your expectations. What might be non-negotiable, meaning it is your walk away, is mental health. That you can't say, oh, if you give me 10,000 more, I'm okay to ruin my mental health.
I mean, some people do, like in investment banking.
Sure, sure. But for them, that means that was not something that they put on their list.
That was
And
not
so
them.
this is very individual. And if we're talking about companies, then they have theirs, but we are talking about individuals here. You do need to either manage expectations, understand the trade off, or walk away.
And I just want to say, actually, when you say that, that some things are non-negotiable, maybe and not a negotiable at that point, but could become negotiable later. So, just
Yeah.
as an example that I came across is when I took my current job, I wanted to work 4 days a week because I wanted to spend one day with my son. However, they told me that employing in these conditions becomes extremely difficult because it's easier for them to employ someone who wants to work full time or half.
Mm-hmm.
There is no in between.
Mm-hmm.
However, I found out very recently that this is actually something quite easily done. So as long as my manager approves that I work 4 days a week, that's no problem for them to reduce my contract, and I will still have the same amount of benefits. So yes, I agreed to something that I did want, wasn't approved at that time, but now I realize it is more negotiable than I thought and quite easy to do actually.
Fantastic. I'm glad that that worked out because that you're proving the point that things change, they evolve, you got new information, and you were able to go back and, in quotes, renegotiate.
Yes, exactly.
We just discussed the job offer example. I want to give you another example from my recent experience with a very dear friend of mine. She's a business owner. She has a small business. She sells insurance, and she has 1,000 clients, let's say, and was in the process of retiring, which I was very delighted for her that she had worked so hard in her life, and she was at the point where she needed to make a good deal because it had a direct financial impact on her future and her retirement. And I will say I was so pleased that she asked me to help her think about how she would negotiate this. The principles that we applied to her negotiation, again, BATNA, reservation, points, ZOPA, but I kind of want to pull it together and give you a sense of the approach that we use. So we called it a give-get because I didn't want to get too theoretical. So she was negotiating with this person about selling her business. She had several terms and conditions. There was a contract and, that was being reviewed. So we said, what would you give away? Let's call her Haley. Okay. So Haley and I were having this discussion, and I asked her, what would you give away from all of this that you're negotiating to get what? So think of it as if that person desperately on the other side wants something, give it to them, but you have to get something in exchange. Because for me, that is the principle of fairness. That's how I see fairness. Fairness for me plays out as if I give you 5 things and you give me back 1, and that's the one that I want, that's fair. So it isn't about 5 and 1. It's about what do you want? And do you walk away feeling like, hey, that was a good deal. And I've bought a nice business from this person and I want them to help me in the future. So you're still preserving those long-term relationships. So we did what every good consultant like I did was we made an Excel spreadsheet. And in the Excel spreadsheet, we made some columns, right? So we put down things that were variables. So as an example, she was willing to support the person that she sold the business to for 1 year, that she will give of her time and help him set up and take over the business. So I asked her, can we spread that out? Can we say it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, or 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, so spread out so you have more variables to play with and you have space to negotiate. We then looked at maybe there was another variable. The other variable was if she was going to give off her time, she was going to charge him $100 an hour or $50 an hour or $150 an hour. That's again a range. So constantly thinking about ranges, that's what ZOPA is, thinking about a range. And the more you can find the range where that person and you are going to land in that Venn diagram, the better it is. We then came up with, hey, you know what? She's selling her business, but what if it doesn't work out? What if the business gets ruined and he doesn't want it and he wants to sell it back to her, and because she's set up a 3-year contract with him? So then we added in a penalty clause. And the penalty clause, we thought, the longer she's away from the business, her ability to come back to it becomes harder. So the penalty should become harder. Mm-hmm. So then we added again a range. So if he decides at the end of year 1, this is really not a business for me, I'd like to sell it back to you, then there is a penalty. But let's make up a penalty here. The penalty was $100K. But let's say he decides this 3 years down the line, it's going to be far harder for her to build back the business, or even if she wants to, she's already invested her money somewhere else, then the penalty becomes $100K. It has to really feel like pain, because you also want to, in a way, incentivize, carrot stick him into keeping the business. Yes. Right? So we came up with ranges. Now, what's really interesting about this was the first time that she had first thought about it as a range, that it's not a number that you're negotiating. So 1, range. 2, thought about it as variables. There's many variables. It isn't, I'm just selling my business to you and please, can you buy my business for $50K? It isn't that. It's, can you buy my business for $50K? With many variables, and the variables are time. The variables are dollar. The variables are penalties. The variable is who will file taxes, and there's a cost related to. The variable is reputation. There's all sorts of things that if you sit down and you think about it, you have multiple variables. And then the last thing was, doing this activity just gave her a tremendous amount of confidence because she was prepared. She now knew why she was saying that her running rate is $100 an hour, because she had researched what others are doing. So this would be in a job equivalent, this would be going to Glassdoor, or this would be asking your friends who do the same kind of work, how much do you get paid? So getting that sort of comparables. So doing the homework, doing the preparation also managed her emotions, because she was actually really excited to sell the business. So her emotions were swinging towards the super positive. So she may have not actually ended up with the best deal because she was willing to do whatever to sell the business because she was ready to retire. So it also helped manage emotions. So this is a very recent example of using these concepts, not using the words, but using the spirit of what this does. It gives you extra tools, it gives you the time to actually prepare, and it helps you manage your emotions related to the process.
It makes a lot of sense. To me, it almost feels a bit like strategic thinking topic.
Yeah.
Like when you're thinking about a topic, if you think about a business or a company, you're thinking about how am I going to maximize profit, right? In this case, yourself, you're also thinking in that similar way. You're thinking about how can I get the most of what I need and want from the situation that also gives back to somebody who's asking from me.
Yeah, correct. And that's the thing about being a confident negotiator is you're prepared. You've done the homework. You've given yourself the space and time to do it. And now with BATNA, your alternatives, your walkaways, your baseline, your bottom line, your ZOPA, you've now given yourself extra tools to be able to do any kind of strategic conversation. So you're right, it is strategic, and you've given yourself the tools. Now, the other thing that it does give you is it gives you a very clear picture of what success will look like. It gives you that picture in your mind very clearly of this one, if this happens, this is a good deal and I'm going to be happy in my heart. And then it helps you manage regret or guilt or all of those. We'll do a whole another episode on regret because that's a term that I dislike. But preparation allows you to have that clear picture of success.
Mm-hmm. Preparation, I mean, it's clear that the preparation goes beyond the numbers here. The fact that she consulted you just to discuss how this would play out already brings a different perspective because you know what you know, you don't know what you don't. So bringing you here already gave her another perspective. For example, the penalty clause, right? She might not have thought about that herself. So bringing the right people, I think that's really important. Any kind of negotiation, we speak about that, the Jedi Council. It's always important to call on them because they might have a completely different input into this. And also thinking about the other person, I think the word empathize now gets a bad rep, but as a design thinker, I do think empathizing with your whoever you're collaborating with or whoever you're negotiating with is very, very important. Another very cool episode by Angela Duckworth in her podcast No Stupid Question talks about this. We can link it below. But by approaching negotiation with a collaborative mindset, where you're aiming to find a solution that benefits both of you, you can break that habit of thinking it's a win or lose situation, that perfectionism that we speak about, right? But it's also true that the other person doesn't have to be interested in collaborating. Often, you find this where you're super self aware, you go into the thinking about everything, and then you realize the other person, for a lack of a better word, is just an asshole.
Yeah.
So, it's also realizing that not everybody will come into a situation thinking about getting the best for you.
Yes. And which actually you're making my case for why you need to have extra tools and not just be about gut and intuition and this is how I'm going to negotiate. You need to know about these principles. You need to know about these kinds of concepts so that in a situation where the other person is, not so nice, then you have extra tools to deal with it. And you're not just walking away being frustrated. You actually have a way to tackle that. They don't have to be collaborative. They don't have to be nice. They can be, in fact, go out of their way to be miserable to you. But now you have tools to tackle.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very difficult situation because here the idea is that negotiation can be collaborative. Is not everybody understands this. Not everybody will do what's best for you. They're only looking out for themselves. And even understanding when to say no, as we spoke about, I think it's important. That reservation price is important in those exact aspects.
To wrap up, I would say negotiation really isn't about getting everything you want. It isn't about that. Now that we've learned the concept of alternatives, so it could be about getting alternatives. It is about the concept of your bottom line. So it could be about creating an awareness even to the other person possibly about what your bottom line is, and then finding some agreement. So it isn't about getting everything you want, but it's about finding common ground so that we can walk away with feeling reasonably satisfied.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a wrap for this episode of Negotiator. If you like this episode, share it forward and help us all rise together.
Your voice matters. Stand up for yourself. And when you can, stand up for someone else too.